I won't go through this in much detail, but I'd like to point out two kind of takeaways from the pro chart that I came up with. One major takeaway is that with the laissez-faire approach, um, innovation is almost guaranteed in a way. That's because monopolies have such a large drive to keep their profit margins high that they will either innovate to make their costs low, innovate to make their operations more efficient, innovate new products to uh, generate demand for their products. And because they have such a large drive for making money, there is almost certainly innovation. Um, in the Competition Act, we are trying to ensure that innovation comes with smaller companies, but they don't have as much of a motivation to make money as does a monopoly. So this innovation is not guaranteed. Um, in this graph, you can see that with innovation, the marginal cost curve is shifted to the right, which means that more can be produced and bought at a lower price. So there is an incentive to innovate. Another takeaway that I had from the pro chart is that a solution that would be effective is one that distributes the power relatively evenly between the three stakeholders. So the laissez-faire approach, for example, gives a lot of power to the consumers, not a lot of power to the government or the corporations, and it relies on the cooperation and coordination of the consumers to dictate the price levels that the producers would set. In the control everything solution, the government has a ton of control, which is oftentimes unhealthy as well. So a solution that I've devised, which is essentially reads, adding a branch to the Competition Bureau that oversees new companies that wish to enter the market but cannot due to entry barriers. And I came up with this solution mostly because I saw that the pressure point almost in this entire problem is the fact that once corporations reach a certain point, they can create artificial entry barriers that close off anybody else that wants to enter the market, which allows them to gain size even more. So that's what my solution addresses. It talks about if these companies are deemed to provide competition or contribute to the market positively by increasing variety, contributing innovation, etc., then the Competition Bureau or some branch of the government should provide subsidies for them to kind of jump over the entry barriers and establish competition in the industry that would otherwise be a monopoly. Now, how this plays out is what these subsidies aim to encourage is to encourage the consumption and production of merit goods and services. And what I mean by this is that obviously the Bureau would have a certain number of criteria, one of which means that you have to be socially responsible when producing your products, which means that this encourages social responsibility in these corporations that may not be present in these mega corporations. It introduces competition that would not naturally be caused due to the entry barriers, therefore keeping costs low and reducing the entry barriers for anybody with a more superior product than the ones that are being offered by the monopolistic company in that industry. Now, obviously, this is not the all-encompassing solution, or else it would have been implemented already, but it's just the one that addresses the pressure point that I think I've identified. Some precautionary measures need to be considered for sure. The first is that anytime that there's subsidies or taxes, you're distorting the free market, which does not have any guaranteed results, does not have a accurately foreseeable future, and it's kind of just pouring money into things and seeing where that shifts the market to see whether or not it addresses the problem that you've identified. It's also arbitrary assistance, and this is true for any subsidy, just because the criteria established for whether or not the government decides to help you is made by people who are who definitely have some sort of bias. And the third one is encouraging inefficiency. And though this might not have a huge influence, monopolies are obviously more efficient in their processes than a startup company. And if we are pouring money into the startup company, perhaps we're encouraging inefficiency in the government operations, and helping them out a little too much, um, because all we want to do is to provide competition. Now, just some assumptions that I've made is that the money being subsidized will be directly used to kind of shift the curves around. So either increase the amount of supply for a particular cost, or increase the demand for a product by, say, advertising or changing the taste. I'm assuming that there is a desire to start new companies, and there are people waiting to start new companies that may not be able to get past the entry barrier. And I'm assuming that necessary information is made to the government when available about the ethical practices of these mega corporations compared to the startups, etc. Just the necessary information to um, deem whether or not these startup companies fulfill the criteria. Now, the impact on these stakeholders is slightly obvious. Obviously, the consumers will experience low prices. Variety will be maintained because it will be constantly introduced into the industry, and these corporations will now be held accountable to the ethical footprints that they are contributing, because the government is now subsidizing the fact that that corporations are socially responsible. In corporations, competition will be maintained. Therefore, monopolies will be reduced. And large corporations will therefore be unable to have as much power over prices as they previously have had. They will obviously still be under control of previous competition laws, but there will be this new branch that is added to the Competition Bureau. The government probably faces the biggest change. Money will be obviously directed towards this branch, which means that taxes will need to increase to subsidize for this movement. But it's difficult to say how much this will contribute, because for the consumers, the prices will be kept low, and the taxes will raise. So it's kind of an equilibrium that needs to be established between these two factors. Between the government and the corporations, relationships with large corporations might weaken just because they are introducing something that is directly against them, which may or may not impact their donation levels, etc. So that's kind of a review of the solution that I've presented. I've also talked about the problem using a causal map. I've reviewed why it is wicked. I've reviewed the stakeholders that take part in the problem, as well as some of the previous solutions, and as well why I think my solution addresses the pressure points that I've addressed. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.